Um, well, basically, we wanted to ask you about your first project or how you started off right after college. So, say, let's to start with, what
You
has
started
your career
in the
been
summer
like?
when you graduated, in
We
2000.
we started while we were in college. There's
Okay.
me and Weber. Our first project was actually while we were still in college. It was a
Okay.
house in Bangalore.
So, which year was this?
This was
I mean, when you were in fourth year?
2001.
All right.
Okay, so
2001.
final year.
Yeah, finally.
Okay.
So then officially after we started office, our first project was a car show. It was a
Okay.
It was like one of these.
Set design.
It was it was in the tennis court of Le Meridien. There was a car finance company that had got Skoda for the first time into India. So it was like this big car that was coming. So they had it was a 3-day event for which they wanted like some basic kind of a structure put up and stuff.
So,
that was
how
our
did
first
you
project.
get that? I mean, did you know the?
Arbitrarily. It was something we were desperate for work. We basically pretty much did everything that came our way when we started. So our first architectural project was actually, I'd say, 7 months into the game, and that was 2 houses that we did for 2 brothers in Faridabad, which finally. The second house, I don't know if they finally finished because after the first house, they chucked us out.
Okay. And you started practice right after, I mean,
Yeah.
right after graduation. Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean,
Actually, before I graduated.
Okay, so you got an idea of how the entire business of it works before
No.
you started? No, because with the first house design, did you get an idea of this is...
No, that's possibly partly the reason why we were chucked out after the first house. Was because we had no idea as to what architectural practice is actually. That's one, that's a major gap in the education you get. Is that even though you're taken, or the hope is to take you to the higher ends of design and quality of design and so on and so forth, there is a very major gap on what our professional, what we are required to do professionally, what our professional practice should be like, and equally important is how do you run your own private practice. If one were to assume that your education here, the 5 years that you spend here, are essentially aimed at trying to get you to start your own practice. That's when this course started. That was what everyone essentially was targeting at. But now, of course, there are different roles that an architect can play. So you don't need to necessarily have only one view that you have to kind of start your own studio. You can be a very successful architect working in a very large construction group or a developer or whatever.
But what was the gap that you felt that
How do you run a business? We had neither my business partner or I had a head for business. So the whole setting up of an office and what is required and how do you proceed about it. Everyone was broadly agreed that when we started our office, it was possibly the worst time to start because there was no work. Everyone was broadly agreed, this is all our friends and well-wishers, that we would really not last very long because neither Vaibhav nor I actually have like business sense. Everyone was broadly agreed that it was a very bad move to start without working for someone else and trying to understand what is. But we did what we did, whatever.
So for your first design, the house design, like how many designs were made and who was
How
the
did you
builder?
get the project to
Yeah.
start with? The first house.
I don't remember. It came through someone recommending or whatever. It came through a very kind of arbitrary kind of thing. Essentially, we got hired because we were cheapest by far. I think if I'm not mistaken, we did 2 houses for 30,000 rupees or 25,000 rupees, something ridiculously low. I think that's the only reason why we got it.
But I mean, how do you make contact? Or I mean, how does someone contact you? Is it family and acquaintances, or how do you put yourself?
Well,
out?
that project came through an acquaintance, I imagine. I've even forgotten who gave it to us, but yeah, something like an acquaintance. And
And you'd already decided, both of you, that you would
That-
kind of do it together, or start a practice on your own before graduation?
Well, actually, originally there were three of us.
Okay.
So finally, like within a year into the practice, our third associate decided that he wanted to leave and study further and this and that. So for a year or a couple of years or something like that. So it wasn't. I mean, yeah, when we were in college, we decided we want to start office together. Most definitely, yeah. That was the major decision that we took. Was essentially, come what may, we'll start.
Okay. And you knew you wanted to do it right after graduation. You
Yeah.
were.
Yeah. I don't know what were the reasons for the other two, but for me, the reason was, so when I was doing my apprenticeship, like in my fourth year, so at that time I worked for a reasonably well-established architect in Chennai.
Okay.
She ran what I would call a mid-size office, about 15 people or so.
Okay.
And I was pretty convinced at the end of that. So I didn't even finish my training with her fully.
Okay.
I broke halfway and went off to Goa. But which was, I mean, also professional. It wasn't like a holiday. But I wrangled some kind of work with some exposition company that was putting on a big show up in Goa.
Okay.
So I spent the last 2 months of my training in Goa.
Okay.
But the first 3 months was, see, essentially it's not like I can say I did it and I realized kya karna hai and said ki I can do this better, so I'll start off. But at a very basic level, I felt that I wouldn't enjoy what I was doing if I was not doing my own thing, or at least having executive powers in deciding what got done or didn't get done. So.
On site, when you went for your first project, like what were your experiences that, okay, this is the gap apart from business sense, with
Working knowledge of maybe the
builders on
construction.
side, the masonry people.
Okay, so
And is there anything that kind of stuck out as?
well, I can't say that I was feeling under-equipped as to, like, what happens on site, or but see, finally your site is a project, okay, that is almost I mean, it's such a huge project that it's almost deserves a separate space other than the design project. Okay, sites need to be managed. There is incredible amounts of planning and programming involved in getting work to move smoothly on site. So this is even if you have a project manager. Now the thing is that in practice, especially in smaller projects like small houses and stuff that we worked on initially, the onus of project management falls squarely on the architect's shoulders, but you don't get paid for it. So in smaller projects, the perception that design and supervision is different from project management is not made. It's a very grey area, which is why you will find that as architects, as practices grow larger and more established and they're in the business of making bigger bucks, they usually don't take on smaller residences. It's essentially because of this overlap, because no one is willing to, the contractor will not can't have a project manager, you can't have a project manager. Clients can't afford to hire a project manager separately, and so the onus comes on, because you're saying you're supervising, but supervising is very different from managing a project. So that's one big gap. So all the building construction classes you do, all the building management classes you do, all the building services classes you do, don't give you an overview of what comes after what is sequential, what are the kind of crises that happen on a site, how do you manage that, who are the different people from the contractor's side who need to be on the site, what kind of rosters should you maintain, how do you supervise whether labor is actually putting in the amount of effort in the right direction at the right time. These are all things that you have no idea until. And there is a sense in saying that you can only learn it on site, because once you learn it on site, then you'll never forget it and all that. But I figure if you're spending 5 years in a place, you might as well get that information beforehand, right? I mean, it's another elective or something that's required. But I think the business of running your firm and the business of